say, no thank you. Yeah? Unacceptable. Someone can turn around and say, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't go near zina. Who said zina is haram? Allah is just recommending this for us. He's guiding us. Yeah? Why does there have to be necessarily a punishment? It's just a guidance. Huh? And there are many examples like that. So Usul al-Fiqh is extremely essential. And a person, unless they are experts, not have studied al-Waraqat, 20 pages of Usul al-Fiqh, experts in Usul al-Fiqh cannot speak about the religion. Yeah, unless they are experts in this science. So Usul al-Fiqh is a very, very important science. And when did Usul al-Fiqh start?
The first book.
No, when did Usul al-Fiqh as a science begin?
Companions.
The time of the companions, from the beginning. And that's the same with the other sciences, tafsir and Arabic and so on. Yeah? But it was only compiled and collected as a science. They say Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i rahimahullah was the first who compiled it in a text known as Risala. Yeah? Risala. And that Risala has been translated into English now. But the point is, Usul al-Fiqh, the companions all had principles and guidelines to guide how they understand the texts. How they understand the texts. Anyways, a large part of Usul al-Fiqh is relating to the scholars. Because they're the ones who are going to use it to make ijtihad. Or students of knowledge, taking the steps to go down that route. But there is a part of Usul al-Fiqh which relates to every single Muslim. And that's what the Shaykh has covered in his book. So, now, he mentions on page 10, he begins on page 10, after the little introduction, he talks about the benefits of learning Usul al-Fiqh and some of the key principles of Usul al-Fiqh. And some of them relate to the scholars, as we said. It's an Islamic science, of course, a person is rewarded for with the correct intention. The science of Usul makes it possible for the person to make ijtihad. Of course, this is one part of ijtihad. This is point number 2 on page 10. Point number 2 on page 10, he says, the science of Usul makes it possible for the person to make ijtihad, i.e., to extract rulings from their sources, and the sources of the Quran and the Sunnah, and everything that follows the Quran and the Sunnah. Like the Fettah of the Sahaba, and like Qiyas and the Ijma' and so on. And of course that's a requirement for the scholar. And like I said, Usul al-Fiqh is a part of being qualified to make ijtihad. It's not the only thing that's required. And we'll come on to the bare minimum sort of requirements for the mufti or scholar. Also, it helps understand, as he says in point number 4, helps understand the terminology of scholars in their books, and that's important. It enables a person, point number 5, to be precise in his wording. And subhanAllah, you'll notice this, that the person who studies Usul al-Fiqh in depth, it is very much built upon principles, common sense, and so on. And so they actually it makes a person more intelligent. It makes a person have better understanding. It makes a person thinking clearer. A lot of people who just dive into learning Islam, it's just chaotic. It's all over the place. Yeah? The learning is all over the place. No bits from here, bits from there, bits and bobs from over here, and so on. Nothing's gathered together. Everything's contradicting because I heard something here, I heard something else there. But hold on, this issue is similar to that, but it's different. And so it's confusion. Yeah, Usul al-Fiqh is excellent in organizing one's thinking and thought. طيب, anyways, number 6, he says, it gives a person confidence in the ijtihad of the scholar whose opinions and views he follows. This number 6, point number 6 here is very important. Yeah? It gives the person confidence in the ijtihad of the scholar, the fatwa of the scholar. Because we're in a time where people don't have confidence in the fatwa of scholars. They think scholars are just talking, from their own pockets. So they'll hear a mufti from a scholar or read about it, and they think, what's this joke? Do you think he just sat there one day and thought, you know what, should we make this the ruling? Lots of thought goes behind making a ruling. Lots of thought. And the books of Usul are ginormous. 10 volumes, 20 volumes, sometimes more than that, of Usul al-Fiqh. It's not a walk in the park. when scholars talk, and as the Shaykh Ahmed Bahjat says, one of the scholars of Medina, he says there is not a single. Someone try it. If someone has, let's see if people sort of agree or disagree on this issue, or see how people take this. He says there is not a single issue in the books of fiqh, in the four madhahib, that has no proof. Every single letter in the books of fiqh has proof for it. Yeah? And some people are shocked at that. Whoa. Yeah? Because they translate proof to mean the certain 100% truth. No, not necessarily. Some scholars are right, some scholars are wrong. On one particular issue, a scholar can be correct, and on one particular issue, a scholar can be incorrect. That's something agreed upon. No one doubts that. But they all have proof for every single thing they say. Every single thing they say. Yes, even the books of the Hanafi scholars, who are mostly attacked, the usual ones on the receiving end of, being fired at, no proof. Of course they have proof. Who do you think these guys are? These guys are people who worship Allah day and night. They're just going to come out and talk about, say this is Allah's ruling, this is Allah's ruling, this is the Prophet's ruling, just like that. So Shaykh Amr Bahjat says, accusing the scholars of not having proof is tantamount to accusing them of fisq, corruption. I.e., you're accusing them of committing a major sin. It is worse than saying, this scholar has committed zina. That's how grave it is. To say this scholar doesn't have proof for what he's saying is like saying this scholar commits zina, or this scholar drinks alcohol. Imagine somebody said from the Muslims, Malik or Abu Hanifa, I can't even say such a thing because of how heavy it is. This scholar, that scholar, used to commit this major sin. He wouldn't be alive for much longer. The Muslims would never have him say that about their scholars. But why is it acceptable for someone to say he speaks without proof? This issue he's got no proof for. He says this, no proof for it. Some people who write books, Malik's opinion is this, and there's no proof for it. Ahmed said this, but there's no proof for it. The correct opinion is this. Malik speaks, Ahmed speaks. None of them have proof for what they're saying. That's a big, big accusation. So we have to be careful. Yeah, maybe another scholar. Okay, hold on. But some scholars do use this word sometimes. They might use this word. Say, وَلَا دَلِيلَ عَلَيْهِ. And there's no evidence for those who say X, Y, Z. Yeah? What does no evidence mean? Doesn't mean this scholar spoke without evidence. It means they disagree with their using of evidence. That's what it means. Yeah? It means this scholar has used evidence, but I don't agree with how they've used the evidence. I disagree. I believe this is the correct way of using the evidence to come to X, Y, Z conclusion. So this is a point to keep in mind. When a person knows Usul Al-Fiqh, they know that scholars, if it wasn't a clear verse from the Quran, and it wasn't a clear text from the Sunnah, it was probably a fatwa of a Sahabi. If it wasn't a fatwa of a Sahabi, it was probably a qiyas. If it wasn't a qiyas, it was probably something else. As opposed to the rigid, close-minded understanding of today, what's the proof? And if you don't have a clear-cut verse or a clear-cut hadith that's in the Sahihain, they consider that no proof. Man, what kind of understanding is that? Where in the world is that? And that's why Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, Abu al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni, rahimahullah, says, the madhab of the Zahiriyya is a bid'ah. So the Zahiri madhab is a bid'ah. This is what his opinion is. And there's a difference of opinion on the issue. He says the Zahiri madhab is a bid'ah, and their opinions are rejected. They don't count. And so if the scholars say one thing, and the Zahiris say another thing, that's like the Zahiris not saying anything. It's still an ijma'. Why? He says because such a large portion of the Sharia is built on qiyas. If you've rejected qiyas like the Zahiris do, you've rejected so much of the Sharia. So many of the evidences of the Sharia don't come from a clear-cut verse and a clear-cut hadith. They come from things based upon the Quran, based upon the hadith. So when we say our evidence is the Quran and the Sunnah, it means the Quran and the Sunnah and everything that's indicated by the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran indicates that we have to follow the Sahaba. For example, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. if they believe the same way that you believed, O companions, then they are guided. Yeah? And والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم. Allah is pleased with them, with the Sahaba from the Muhajirin and Ansar, and those who followed in their path. So the Quran tells us following the Sahaba. Yeah? So the fatwa of a Sahabi, and this is one of the biggest evidences of the Sharia, the fatwa of a Sahabi. People don't understand this. And so many issues that people say is a bid'ah are opinions of the Sahaba. Opinions of Abu Hurairah, opinions of Ibn Umar, opinions of Umar. The Prophet ﷺ obligated us to follow the Khulafa, the four Khulafa, and this person comes and says this is a bid'ah, this is haram, there's no evidence for this. Umar holds this opinion. You have to follow the fatwa of Umar with conditions. With conditions. So this is a big thing where people are mistaken and they go wrong. Qiyas is another big thing. Ijma' is another big thing. For example, Khutbat al-Eid, as one of our mashayikh mentions. How many khutbas is Khutbat al-Eid? One or two? Who says one? It's two khutbas. By ijma', it's two khutbas. By ijma'. So someone comes along and says, la, the apparent meaning of the hadith says that it's one khutbah. It doesn't explicitly say it. Even the Zahiri said it's two khutbahs. So he says the apparent meaning of the hadith says this one. If you're going to be more Zahiri than the Zahiris, then there's a problem. Even Ibn Hazm and the Zahiris agree that it's two khutbahs. Why? Because there's something called amal, practice of the people, practice of the Sahaba. And this is a famous issue where Malik held the opinion that the practice of the scholars of Medina is a proof. And Al-Layth ibn Sa'd said the practice of Medina is not a proof. And a group of other scholars, most of the scholars don't consider it the same way Malik does. Why does Malik consider it a proof? Not because he thinks, oh, Medina is such a great place, we have to follow the scholars of Medina. No, he's saying it is impossible. One generation after the Prophet ﷺ, people are acting upon something so blatant, like the adhan, for example, and the iqama and wudu, and they're getting it wrong. In Medina, where the Sahaba are still alive, where the children of the Sahaba are still alive. Okay, so he actually says it's a sunnah, not just the practice of Medina in and of itself being a proof. He says the practice of Medina proves that it's a sunnah. Okay, it proves that it's a sunnah. And this is the point. So the practice of people, if that's just the practice of Medina, so imagine the practice of all the Sahaba. If Al-Layth agrees, where was Al-Layth ibn Sa'd? Where did he live? Egypt. Al-Awza'i, where did he live? Al-Sham. Yeah, Al-Sham. Al-Thawri, where did he live? Iraq. Okay. Malik, Medina. Ibn Uyayna, Mecca. If Malik agrees, and Ibn Uyayna, and Al-Awza'i, and Al-Thawri, and Al-Layth, all of them agree on an issue, that means the fatwa in Mecca is this, and the fatwa in Medina is this, and the fatwa in Iraq is this, and the fatwa in Sham is this, and the fatwa in Basra is this. If they all agree on an issue, it means the practice of the whole ummah is one. How can someone come later on and say, no, the hadith seems to mean this. Seems to mean this. Okay, it's a big mushkil. So Usul al-Fiqh puts trust in the scholars. Even if we don't quite see the exact reasoning, we know they don't talk just like that. There are usul that they base their opinions on. Anyways, so I delved on that one because it's quite important. Yeah? It's very, very important. And the number of times, I've lost count of the number of times where myself and many people, and I think all of us have this, we see the opinion of a scholar and the evidence, as some people attribute this as their evidence, and I think, is that it? That's the only proof. Yeah? Maybe it's a weak hadith. Or someone writing about them says his proof was a weak hadith. Then you go into the long texts of that madhab or that scholar or whatever, and he writes pages and pages of evidences. And you think, oh, okay. Now I appreciate that this is a valid opinion. Yeah? So it's very important to not restrict ourselves to one book or two books. very often you'll see in writings of people, the Hanbalis said this, and their evidence was the hadith of Abu Hurairah. It's not just one hadith, the evidence. This is maybe the unevidence that they use, or that they add out of istitnas. Okay, istitnas meaning what's the translation of istitnas? So it's not the evidence, but it's something to strengthen, to add strength to a position. For example, when a scholar writes, this is my chosen opinion, and it was also the opinion of Malik and Al-Awza'i. Are Malik and Al-Awza'i proofs in and of themselves? They're not proofs in it. But is it good to add Malik and Al-Awza'i? Why? Why do they add it?
Supplement.
It's a supplement. Good, that's the word I'm looking for. It's a sort of supplement to add strength to this opinion, to add confidence in this opinion. So sometimes the scholars will only mention one or two evidences. It doesn't mean it's restricted to that. Very often there is an ocean of evidences. But because of the nature of this book, it's a small book. For example, Al-Kafi by Ibn Qudama, he won't add more than one or two evidences. This is the ruling, here's the proof. The second narration in the madhab is this, and this is the proof. Go to Al-Mughni, he's talking about the exact same issue. Al-Kafi can now be bought in one volume. Al-Mughni is in over 10 volumes, more. Some are 15, some are 17, and so on. In Al-Kafi he mentions one or two evidences. In Al-Mughni he mentions maybe 10 or 15. And he argues and defends this opinion and responds and refutes the opposing evidences. Okay, so it's very important to know that the evidences of scholars are based upon a lot of work, a lot of effort, and the meaning, this is the final point on this issue, the meaning of ijtihad is to reach. Some scholars have said, ijtihad is to reach such a level of effort and research that the mujtahid does not think he can go anymore. And other scholars said that's too much. You can't do that in every issue. But at least you need to be fairly confident and fairly certain that that's it. This is enough evidence that I have gathered and collected to come across this rule. That's ijtihad. Yeah? So ijtihad is a big thing. Ijtihad is a big thing. Okay. So it gives people confidence in the scholars, yeah? Especially the early scholars. And the science of Usul teaches a person how to word questions to scholars, and that's one part of Usul al-Fiqh, how a person should question how a person should question scholars. If we turn the page over, on part 1 he says a couple of things that relate to the layman in Usul al-Fiqh. 1.1, this is on page 12, the ruling of a Muslim doing deeds without knowing the Islamic legal verdict. And some scholars have reported a consensus that it is wajib to know the ruling of an issue before you act upon it. And that, you'll find the Shaykh mention it in the first paragraph. Yeah, the last sentence of the first paragraph on page 13, it is mentioned that there is a consensus on the prohibition of performing an action before knowing the ruling. So you can either underline that part or put a star by it if you wish or whatever. Yeah. So it's obligatory to know the ruling of an issue before you go. Like now, may Allah accept the Hajj and Umrah of the Hujjaj. They went for Hajj. It is wajib for them to learn the rulings of Hajj before they do it. It's wajib. Okay. Person's about to give zakah, finally they have enough money, it is now wajib to learn the rules of zakah. Person's about to get married, it's wajib to know the rules of marriage. And so on. The person is thinking of divorce, or even before that, it is wajib to know the rulings of divorce. And so on. Yeah? And so on. Now this applies, and this I am yet, I haven't found an explicit statement of a scholar saying this exact thing, but this is what I gather from their overall words, that this applies to those issues where it seems most likely that a ruling is required. So for example, hands up if you checked the ruling of drinking apple juice before you drank. No one checked. Hands up if you check the ruling of wearing grey socks before you wore them, or blue socks. No one checked. Yeah? No one checked the ruling. So when we say it's obligatory to know the ruling of everything before you act upon it, it means those issues where may be problematic, and most likely will need a fatwa, most likely will need a question. Okay? Because we know, this doesn't need a fatwa, it's obvious. Yeah? This is like necessarily known in the religion. Wearing socks, wearing shoes and this and that, all of this is fine. Apple is allowed, apple juice is allowed, doesn't require a fatwa. Orange is allowed, orange juice is allowed, and so on. Okay? Fruits are generally allowed, and so like I said, that has to be added in. Otherwise we're in a problem. If we say every single issue you do, you have to have a ruling from a scholar, there's no way a person can do that. So that's a common sense issue, but I started off with the introduction of I haven't read it from the exact words of a scholar, just so that if I come across an explicit word from a scholar, I'll mention it to you another time, inshallah. Okay, anyway, so he says here in the second paragraph, Umar radiallahu anhu wouldn't let people buy and sell in the marketplace unless they know the rulings of buying and selling, unless they know the rulings of trade. Yeah? And alhamdulillah, now that's very easy to find. The fatwa is easy to get now, alhamdulillah. The wisdom behind a Muslim being bound by Islamic rulings. Here the Shaykh waffaqahullah talks about how the Sharia is necessary to be followed because of its guidance. And if we thank Allah for Islam day and night, 24 hours a day, that's not enough. Because Islam is an unmatched blessing. Unmatched. And the one who mixes with non-Muslims or has lived the lifestyle of non-Muslim knows this very well. Knows very well how disastrous it is to be in a state of confusion and misguidance, not knowing where you're going, not knowing what you're doing. It's not a nice life to be living. And the worst thing is that it's stress and difficulty in the dunya, and it gets even worse in the akhirah. It's not like they're having a great time in the dunya, but they're going to face the consequences in the akhirah. They're suffering in the dunya. And the one who's away from Allah's guidance is suffering severely in the dunya, Muslim or non-Muslim. And then in the akhirah, there is also no portion. خَسِرَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْخُسْرَانُ الْمُبِينُ. That's the clear loss, to lose the dunya and the akhirah. So, sometimes it is true that we have to be wise in the way we talk about rulings, and when we speak about rulings, it's not always applicable, it's not always the time to talk about halal and haram, because our hearts are weak now. We're in a time where iman is lower, and some people get sick and tired of religion. Yeah? You're talking about the ruling on whether it's allowed to make a snowman or not. Yeah? You're talking about the ruling on whether you can do this or not. Some people get sick and tired. And so it's not always appropriate to talk about halal and haram and spread it amongst people. If we have been blessed by wanting to follow the Sharia to the teeth in every single issue, that's a great blessing. Yeah? But we have to think about our surroundings as well. Yeah? We have to think about our surroundings as well. And to not to not think that this is a burden. Following the Sharia is not a burden. It's like someone giving us directions when we're in need. If we're stuck and someone says, "Are you alright there? Do you know where you're going?" And you tell them, and they say, "Right here, then take a left, then do this." You're not going to sit there and think, "This guy is stressing me out. I want to get to my place and he's sat here talking to me." You're going to be over the moon. I'm stuck and he's guiding me. Yeah? You'll probably say thank you 15 times before you walk off. So the same here. We're in need of guidance. When the Sharia comes down, it's guiding us, it's giving us directions. So we shouldn't see it as a burden. Oh, rulings again, halal, haram again, everything's haram, everything. If someone came to you and said, "Don't go that way. Yeah, I strongly advise you not to go around that area. It's a problematic area. People are always getting shot there. There's always problems there. Whatever it is." You're not going to complain at them. "Oh, where should I go then? You guys are always telling me not to go places." You're going to be grateful. Much appreciated. Thank God he told me. So the same applies here. Whether the Sharia says it's haram or halal, alhamdulillah, that's a direction for us. It's a guidance. Okay. طيب. Page 17. It's going to take us a long time to read this word for word. That's why I didn't see the point in doing that. It's easy to read. You can read it, in your own time. It's good to revise this over again. So we'll just touch on the main parts of every page. The Shaykh says, if an incident occurs where a person needs to know the Islamic ruling, he falls into either one of two categories. How many categories? Two categories. Mujtahid or muqallid. Mujtahid or muqallid. Okay? No muttabi' or alim and so on. That all comes under mujtahid or muqallid. If you want to say, I'm not a muqallid, I'm a muttabi', we say no problem. That's the category of taqleed. Yeah? That's the category of taqleed. And that doesn't mean that taqleed is the same, for everyone is the same. Doesn't mean that a very advanced student of knowledge is like a farmer who's never studied Islam before. Doesn't mean that. But it means, as far as the scholars are concerned, you're either a mujtahid or a muqallid. So if you're not a mujtahid, you have to be a muqallid. There's no third category. Okay? There's no third category. And, like I said, Sheikh Saad regularly comes to the UK. Anyone who wants to discuss that with him is welcome to. So, the first, he says, is capable of making ijtihad. Okay? That's a scholar. It's a scholar, a faqih. The second is unable to make ijtihad. Unable to make ijtihad. And now, here is a key thing to keep in mind. If I know the evidence of a scholar, that does not take me out of the category of taqleed. Otherwise, we are all mujtahids. We all know an evidence or two for a couple of things. Knowing the evidence does not take you out of taqleed. And in Sharh Rawdat al-Nadir by Ibn Qudama, it was explained by Ibn Badran al-Hanbali, rahimahullah. Sheikh Sa'd al-Shithri has a small hashia, footnotes on this book. It comes in 2 volumes. And he mentions this point in this book. He says, the vast majority of scholars are agreed. And when I say vast majority, it's more or less an ijma'. But there are 1 or 2 names who go against this. The vast majority of scholars do not consider knowing the proof of an issue to take you out of the category of taqleed. These are the words that he says. Okay? So Ibn Qudama rahimahullah, after speaking about taqleed and ijtihad, what does taqleed mean? Following, yeah? In this case, it means following a scholar on a religious issue. So Ibn Qudama says the scholars are agreed that taqleed is permissible. This is Ibn Qudama in Al-Rawdah. So the scholars are agreed that taqleed is permissible for the layman. Then he said, bal yajibu. In fact, it is obligatory. Not just permissible, it's obligatory. Abu al-Khattab also, Al-Hanbali, says it is obligatory for the layman to make taqleed. Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, similarly in Al-Udda, it is obligatory for the layman to make taqleed. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in Al-Musawwada, it is obligatory for a layman to make taqleed. And so on. Yeah, the scholars are agreed on this issue. Except the shudud of Ibn Hazm and Shawkani rahimahumullah. And like I said, most scholars don't consider that a valid opinion in the first place. Now, this person, when he makes taqleed of a scholar, all it means is he's asking a scholar. So there's nothing to sort of be scared about this word taqleed as though it's an evil thing. It just means asking a scholar. Allah has commanded this. Yeah? When the muqallid, when a Muslim asks a scholar for a ruling, and the mufti gives him a ruling, that's it. If the muqallid says, Shaykh, what's the proof for this issue? If you don't mind me asking. And the mufti gives him an answer, and he now has an evidence. It's just to make him happy. Otherwise, like I said, Usul al-Fiqh. The books of fiqh are huge when it comes to evidences of the scholars on one particular issue. And as the Shaykh bin Uthaymin rahimahullah says, remind me to mention this point in a second. So now if you've asked him for a fatwa, that's taqleed. طيب, what if you've asked him for an evidence? Taqleed. Taqleed. Still taqleed. It doesn't change anything. Okay? People misunderstand and think that because I'm I'm not following the scholar, I'm following this hadith. The hadith that he gave me is what I'm following. I'm not following the scholar. The answer is, if you saw a hadith and the scholars agreed that you're not allowed to act upon the hadith, it becomes haram for you to follow that hadith. Okay? So if we have a hadith in the Sahihain that's mutawatir, and the scholars agree that we're not acting upon this hadith. Why? Because it's abrogated, or whatever other reason. Because it's not to be understood in its apparent meaning, whatever it is. The scholars agree it is haram for you to act on this hadith. And you have to go with the ijma'. So you're not acting upon the hadith, you're acting upon what the scholar told you. Okay? You're acting upon what the scholar told you. Now, point number 2, we deceive ourselves when we think we have encompassed the rulings, the evidences of a particular ruling. As Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah says, when I go through A'lam al-Muwaqqi'een, who's written by what? By who? A'lam al-Muwaqqi'een, also known as I'lam al-Muwaqqi'een, by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. So he says, when I go through this book, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions an opinion. He says one group of scholars say this, and the evidence is this and this and this and this and this and this. And subhanAllah, this exact thing from I'lam al-Muwaqqi'een happened to me. The scholars say this and this and this and this and this and this. So Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah says, he says, the person reading this thinks this is the ultimate, absolute certain truth. No one can hesitate and question this. Then Ibn al-Qayyim says, and another group of scholars said this, and the evidence was this and this and this and the person says, oh no. This is the absolute truth that no one can question or hesitate on. And that's the reality. That's the reality. That sometimes we think that, come on, look at the proofs. It's blatantly the truth. Obviously the truth. Then you see the opposing side's truth and you think, obviously the truth. This is not a weak opinion. This is a weak opinion. After it being the absolute truth, it became a weak and sometimes maybe false. Yeah? So it's important to not be sort of deceived. This is a nice benefit by Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, that it's easy to be deceived. If a person has not encompassed the furu' of fiqh and the evidences of ahkam from the Quran and the Sunnah and the rulings of the Sahaba, we're easily deceived. We're easily deceived. Yeah? So we come across evidence after evidence after evidence, and we think how do people go against this? Amazing how people don't follow these evidences. Someone else mentions their evidences, you think it's amazing how people don't follow these evidences. So the fact that you've asked for an evidence does not change anything. It doesn't change anything. And in fact, we're rewarded for making taqleed of the alim, as Allah commanded, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of dhikr if you don't know. Okay. So, a person is a muqallid or a person is a mujtahid. As the Shaykh mentioned here, the verse, ask the people of remembrance if you do not know. Also, page 18, point D, the author mentions the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is in the Sahihain. If you did not know, why did you not ask? Indeed, the cure for ignorance is to ask. Yeah? Here's a point by Shatibi rahimahullah on the next page. He says, when a muqallid, someone who's not a scholar, is faced with a religious issue, there is no recourse in the religion except for him to ask the people of knowledge concerning. Yani there's no way out except to ask the people of knowledge. There's no way for you to except that you ask the people of knowledge. We'll come on later. When we say taqleed, some people think it's taqleed of a madhab particularly. Yeah? We'll come on to the following of a madhab later on, inshaAllah, etc. But the point here is, following the fatwa of a scholar is the only option. It's the only option. Yeah? And the Shatibi rahimahullah in al-Muwafaqat, and Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti also, who is the author of Adwa al-Bayan, the famous tafsir, and he has a couple of writings in Usul al-Fiqh. And he has a sharh of or he has a Mudhakkira in Usul Fiqh, which is like a summarized version of what's in Rawdat al-Nadir by Ibn Qudama. In another text of his, in a sharh of his, he says, just like, and this is an important one, the Shatibi and the Shinqiti both mention this, just like the Quran and the Sunnah, the texts, are evidences for the scholar, the ruling of a scholar is an evidence for the layman. That means if we come on the Day of Judgment and we're questioned, why did you do this? If I was to respond and say, the fatwa by XYZ was given to me, and I did what I could to make sure he's a qualified person, this is what he gave me, there is no sin upon him. And there is a clear, authentic hadith on the issue, authenticated by Al-Hakim, and Al-Zahed, and Ibn Hibban, where the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever asks a mufti on an issue, that was an error. Yeah? So the mufti gave him an answer that was a mistake. The mufti gave him an answer that was a mistake. Then the sin is upon the mufti, not upon the layman. So that means the sin is upon the mufti. This is if the mufti didn't go through the necessary procedures to give a fatwa. Because if he had gone through the necessary procedures, he would be rewarded even if he made a mistake. Yeah? As in the other hadith, if the mufti, if the mujtahid makes ijtihad and gets it right, how many rewards does he have? 2. And if he gets it wrong, 1 reward. So the scholar is rewarded for giving a fatwa, even if he's wrong. So we're not talking about that. There's no doubt a muqallid can follow both of these. We're talking about the scholar who didn't go through the necessary procedures. Therefore he became sinful by giving this fatwa. Because he didn't check well enough, he didn't look at the evidences enough, and so on. Still he gave a fatwa. This layman who's now following his fatwa, is he sinful? He's not sinful. So if he's not sinful by following a scholar who is sinful for not doing a good enough job, how can he be sinful for following a scholar who has done a good enough job? And who has got it wrong by chance? How? That's astonishing. And how can he be wrong if he's following, of course, a scholar who's got it right? Obviously that's impossible. Yeah, so this point is to be understood. Because, this issue has made life difficult for a lot of Muslims. A person's been given a fatwa, someone said this to me. I'm not sure. What do you think? You've asked someone already, that's it. There's no point asking every person. Some people attend conferences when mashayikh come and visit. Every conference, the same question. Every conference, the same question. Ya akhi, ask one person and go home and just act upon that. And do something beneficial with your life. Yeah, so, because people are being forced, no. Act upon the evidences, act upon the correct opinion, act upon this. The scholars are not a proof. The scholars are men, they're human beings, they make mistakes. This guy feels like he's Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. So much pressure is on him, he has to do research, he has to find the correct opinion, he has to guide people. Yeah? So this is a mushkil. So this hadith mentioned by Al-Hakim in his Sahih, in his Mustadrak, and authenticated it. And Ibn Hibban authenticates it. The Prophet ﷺ says, if a person is given the fatwa by a mufti, and the mufti makes an error due to not putting in the right effort or going through the correct procedures and so on, the sin is upon the mufti, not upon the questioner. Okay? Because the questioner has done what he's been commanded to do by Allah. And ask the scholars. It's the mufti's fault for not going. I'm not sinful. Alhamdulillah. Come on the Day of Judgment, no sin whatsoever. There is no hesitation in that. Okay? طيب. We won't take too long, inshallah. Here, on page 20, the author mentions a couple of points. The manners of a Muslim with a mufti. Who does a Muslim ask for a fatwa? Being bound by a fatwa. What if you can't find a mufti? Does he have to follow a specific madhab? And that kind of stuff. So if we turn the page over, the manners of a Muslim with the mufti, page 22. He must maintain good conduct, that's obvious. He show respect for the mufti and his position. Yeah? Should show respect for the mufti. I.e., you're asking and you're below the mufti. When we ask a mufti, we're below the scholar. We're not an authority over the scholar. Let me see what you have. Yeah? and I'm going to check to see whether your answer is right or... Who are you? You're that special. Why are you asking in the first place? So we humble ourselves in front of people of knowledge, and what they give, we have to respect. Yeah? Otherwise, if the major scholars of Islam show unbelievable amounts of humility for scholars, then what about us? Yeah, what about us? So that issue is important. He doesn't ask questions for verdicts at inappropriate times. The author says, like when the mufti is angry and sad and so on. That's one element of it. And also, thinking about the audience. Thinking about the audience. If it's a big conference, men are there, women are there, children are there, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 12-year-olds. It's not the time to ask questions that are severely inappropriate for young people. It's not appropriate. Yeah? It's not appropriate at all. It makes no sense. It's not the time to ask about that sort of thing. Sometimes questions that cause fitna as well. It's not time to ask about that sort of question. Yeah? So we have to keep that in mind. Point number 4, some scholars state that the Muslim should not ask the mufti for the evidence of his verdict, right next to some scholars, such as Ibn Taymiyyah in Al-Musawwada. In the sitting, he's asking the question. In the sitting here. So, I go to the scholar, and I say, Shaykh, I did X, Y, Z. Do I have to repeat my salah? And the mufti says, no, not a problem. Say, what's the proof? What's the proof for that? Some scholars dislike that. Yeah? Because it's as though you are rejecting the fatwa of a scholar, and it comes under the issue of respect. You're not going to do a better job than the mufti when it comes to finding evidence. So, if you trust him to be a scholar, go with what he says, and that's it. And we'll come to see later, he has to be pious and religious and knowledgeable. So if you don't believe him to be pious, don't ask him. And if he is pious, then he's not going to speak about Allah's religion just like that. Yeah? He'll tell you, I don't know, or let me double check, or here is the answer. So some scholars dislike asking for evidence. A group of other scholars, like the author of Maraqi Su'ud, rahimahullah, which is a text in Usul Al-Fiqh, said, no, there's no problem in asking a scholar for an evidence. But, as a request, yeah, not in a way of, tell me the proof, what's the proof? Okay, for that. As a request. Not a sort of, I won't accept this till you give me the proof. Yeah, or I won't follow this till you give me. You're asking for an evidence. Why? Because when we know the evidence of a ruling sometimes, what does that bring? What's the benefits for us knowing the evidence of rulings?
Advise others maybe.
Possibly. What else? For us, our own.
Contentment.
Contentment. Yeah? It brings much more contentment to us. Big difference between if I said to you, not allowed, and between not allowed. The Prophet ﷺ says, and this hadith is in Sahihain, XYZ, XYZ, XYZ. And Malik says this, Abu Hanifa says this, Shafi'i says. That's it. Yeah? I'm going to ask again, till the Yawm al-Qiyamah. Yeah, so it brings a lot of contentment. So sometimes it can be good to ask, to give the evidence, when we're talking about the mufti. Sometimes the mufti shouldn't give an evidence, as the scholars say. Sometimes he shouldn't give it. This opinion that you have to ask for the proof is batil. That's the first point. Someone who claims you have to ask the mufti for evidence, that's batil by ijma'. No scholar said this. No scholar that counts when it comes to ijma'. No. And the opinion that it's haram is also false. It's haram to ask for the evidence is also false. These are two extremes. It's permissible, and it can be recommended, and it can be disliked depending on circumstance. But all of this is mentioned by Ibn Qudamah rahimahullah in the Rawdah. So when giving, sometimes the mufti doesn't give the fatwa because it sometimes confuses the question even more. Sometimes giving the evidence, the mufti will say, this is the ruling, here's the proof. Think, how in the world is that a proof? Yeah, how in the world is that a proof? Because sometimes the way proofs are understood are not as clear as the sun. Sometimes it does require some understanding. Okay, sometimes it requires some understanding. And so sometimes it's not recommended for the mufti to give the proof. But anyways, what's the summary of these 2 pages? Or the summary on the issue of asking for proof? Is it haram to ask for proof? No.
No.
Is it wajib? No. What's the ruling then?
Recommended at times.
Yeah, recommended. A person can say it's recommended or permissible in the correct manner. Yeah, so it's recommended, permissible to ask for the proof in the correct manner. As for the mufti, he'll decide whether it's appropriate or not. But as for us asking for the evidence, there's no issue. So long as it doesn't come across as though I'm rejecting you, I'm rejecting your position unless you provide me with evidence. طيب. Yeah.
Just a quick question, sorry.
But before you ask, brothers, when shall we end this? So now it's 6:15. Hands up for now. There's no issue if you say, hands up for 6:30. 6:30?
That's good time.
Yeah.
6:30 is a good time. Okay, yes.
So, just really quickly, sorry. When you said that no one says haram, so when you said some scholars said that they should not ask, they're saying dislike, not
Dislike, makruh.
Even
Yeah.
if it's Ibn
Yes, makruh. Yeah. No, makruh. Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't say it's haram for asking for it, but it dislike.
And just it's kind of related, but it happens quite a lot. So a lot of the time, laymen will be speaking, and then a lot of the time, that's when people will be like, okay, what's your proof?
The using of an evidence by a layman is never a proof. Never. Unless they want to say, look, I asked such and such scholar, this is what he said. Same issue. I asked him, and this is what he said to me. That's a proof for us. If someone came to me and said, brother, hadith is clear, I said, I couldn't. I would rather accept the fatwa of Malik, yes or no, than you with 1,000,000 ahadith. If you were to give me 1,000,000 ahadith, I wouldn't accept what you're saying. And Malik opposed and said, yes or no, I would rather take the fatwa of Malik. Why? Because I'm concerned about myself on the Day of Judgment. If I come on the Day of Judgment and Allah asks me, why did you do this? And I say, he told me, I'm in trouble. But if I come and say, Malik told me, I'm safe. Because the Ummahs agreed that Malik is a mujtahid. Okay? And we'll come to see in a minute that doesn't mean that you leave evidences and don't bother, evidences are not important and so on. We'll come to that issue in a second. Yeah? But a layman, any person coming to me and saying something, yes, if they came to me and said, brother, there are a couple of ahadith that say you shouldn't do this. And the 4 Imams agree on this issue. Yeah? Or the majority of scholars agree on this issue. And this scholar said this, and this scholar said this. And then yes, that's an evidence, that ought to be taken seriously. Not like the person who said to a person, brother, the Prophet ﷺ says, if one of you finds something in their stomach, a feeling of gas and so on, لا ينصرف. Don't leave the salah حتى يسمع صوتا أو يجد ريحا, until they smell something or hear something. So that means if you don't smell anything or hear anything, then the wudu isn't wajib. Yeah? Wudu is not wajib unless you hear something coming from your body or you smell a bad smell. And one of the scholars narrates this story. He said, so he was telling people about this. This is the hadith. To me, it might seem, oh, okay, good point. It's in the Sahihain as well, Bukhari and Muslim. That's a valid point. Alhamdulillah, that's good. Yeah? I'll just make sure that, if this ever happens, I just walk away as far as possible. To make sure I don't smell anything or make sure that I'm listening to something loudly and I don't hear anything. So an evidence, and by the way, the scholars are agreed that this is wrong. Yeah? The scholars are agreed that that's wrong. Until you hear something or smell something, meaning until you are certain. These were just examples of certainty. Otherwise, wudu is rarely ever, any 50% of wudu is therefore not needed. Okay, so a narration on its own isn't sufficient from a layperson. A narration understood by a scholar like this, no problem. Yeah. Are you going to say something?
Yeah. With regards to a mujtahid and a faqih, is there any difference, or is it the same?
No, there isn't. But the categories of a mujtahid or a faqih are levels. So you'll have mujtahid mutlaq, like Malik and Abu Hanifa and the 4 Imams, and Al-Awza'i and Al-Thawri and so on. And you'll have the mujtahid of a madhab who is sometimes the same level or just below, but they stuck to the principles of another scholar, like Ibn al-Qasim, like Al-Muzani, Al-Shafi'i, like Qadi Abu Yusuf, like Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, and others. Like Abu Dawood as well, Sijistani, the author of the Sunan. Very much close student of Ahmad, rahimahullah. Then you have, the levels of mujtahid who are inside the madhab, like Ibn Qudama and Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim in the Hanbali madhab, like Al-Nawawi, Al-Rafi'i in the Shafi'i madhab, and Al-Ghazali in the Shafi'i madhab also, and like who Al-Lakhmi and Ibn Rushd and Ibn al-Arabi and Ibn Abd al-Barr in the Maliki madhab, and like Sarakhsi and Ibn Abidin possibly in the Hanafi madhab and so on. And so you have sort of grades of mujtahid. But all of them are considered scholars of ijtihad who can give fatwa, whose fatwa is accepted. The following, page 24 here, who does a Muslim ask for fatwa? Now, the author mentions the following are some of the ways in knowing, and he mentions 5 points. He has known him for some time as being a person of knowledge and sound reputation. This is point number 1. So, for example, who can name some people in our time who have been known for a long time now as being a person of knowledge and reputation?
The author of the book.
The author of the book, for example. For example, the author of the book. He's been known for many years now to be a person of sound reputation. He's in the permanent committee in a country which has many scholars. None of them have only spoken good about him. They've only spoken good about him. Yeah? And respected him and accepted him onto the permanent committee, etc. So that's a proof. And others. Yeah? The famous scholars of the various countries. The famous scholars who are in the fiqh councils. Yeah? Like the current Mufti of Saudi Arabia, like those in that council, like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, like Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah, like Sheikh Muhammad Hassan al-Shanqiti. All of them are in these councils. No one has ever spoken badly against them. And the scholars are in there together. Yeah? The scholars are in there together and discussing issues together. And no one stood up and said, who's this? We're not having him in this gathering, discussing fiqh issues. He's not from Ahlul Sunnah. So the scholars didn't do that. If the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia didn't do that, if the previous Grand Mufti didn't do that, Sheikh Ibn Baz, he didn't do that to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi. So who are you to do it? Yeah? And if Sheikh al-Albani didn't do it to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, then who are you to do it? Yeah? And so on. So these scholars who are accepted by the Ummah as being people of ijtihad and fatwa. He's appointed to deliver religious verdicts and teach, and is respected by people. Like we said, the permanent committee now in Saudi Arabia. And we mentioned Saudi Arabia because it's the country that is the most apparent when it comes to knowledge and fatwa and so on. It's the most famous online and on TV and in terms of being widespread. Otherwise, many other countries are the same. But we're talking about things that everyone is aware of. Okay, so now if someone is the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, that's sufficient. Sufficient. Yeah? Someone is considered from the big muftis in such a country, that's sufficient. Yeah? Somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy refers people to him, giving him reference as being trustworthy and a mujtahid. A known scholar says he's a known scholar. A known scholar says, ask him. Yeah? Ask him. That's another sign. Now, someone knowledgeable and trustworthy refers to him. It becomes widespread amongst people that he's suitable for issuing verdicts. Also, the scholars mention, a fiqh mentions to you that this person is worthy of following, a trustworthy person. Yeah? Somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy here doesn't mean scholar, necessarily. And the scholars of Usul mention this in their books. They say, أن يخبر هو بذلك ثقة وقيل ثقتان. That a trustworthy person mentions to you. So you come, for example, to a student of knowledge. He's not a scholar, but you know he's religious. You know he's trustworthy. You know he has a couple of years of experience and knowledge, and he says to you, you know what, here's the fatwa of a scholar. That's enough for you to, as an evidence, to know that this is a scholar. Some scholars said we want 2 witnesses, so 2 students of knowledge and 2, no issue, either way. Yeah, either way. People, trustworthy, pious, knowledgeable, tell you, you know what, this person is worthy of taking knowledge from, taking a fatwa from, and so on. Such a person can be asked for a fatwa. It's as simple as that. The ummah is agreed that the 4 madhahib are permitted to be followed. Yeah? So this is a matter of ijma'. That the 4 madhahib, as Al-Shanqiti rahimahullah mentions in his sharh, the ummah has agreed that the 4 madhahib are permissible to follow. So, of course, when we go through all these ways of finding out a scholar, if it's a madhab, that suffices us. We don't need to bother. We don't need a trustworthy person. We don't need anyone. We don't need a position as a judge. We don't need a position as Grand Mufti. The fact that it's the position of the madhab is enough. And the ummah has agreed that following that is allowed. So if I now go to a person who's trustworthy and I say, brother, what's the Hanafi madhab on X, Y, Z issue? And you trust him to know what the Hanafi madhab is, and he says, this is the Hanafi madhab. That's allowed for you to follow. That's allowed for a person to follow. Now, he mentions after mentioning the 5 points, if a Muslim does not know his suitability to make ijtihad, then it is not correct for him to ask that person. Not correct, i.e. haram. Not correct, i.e. haram. Yeah? So when he says it's not correct, i.e. it is haram to ask for the fatwa of someone who you don't know. Oh, he's got a class. Let me ask him for a fatwa. Or he's the imam of a masjid. This has happened to me a couple of times. He's the imam of a masjid. He's got a beard. He's got a thobe. Nice voice when reciting. Yeah, he must know what he's talking about. So let's go and ask him. And we're not talking about light issues. How do I pray? How do I fast? Is this wudu valid? No. No, they're talking about serious issues here. And they go to the local mosque imam. Yeah, that's prohibited. And that's a big problem. Yeah? You can ask them to direct you, possibly, and so on. Otherwise, it's a problem. So, always when a person know the distinction between 2 things. If a person is not qualified, can I ask this person? Yes. Yes. But, what's the condition? A reference of another scholar and they're trustworthy and relatively knowledgeable. Relatively knowledgeable. Not any reference from anyone counts. Because some people will write you references, they haven't got a clue what it means. And you'll find this a lot. The scholars said this. The scholars said this. This scholar said this. This scholar said this. And this guy doesn't have a clue what black and white is. How are you going to narrate to me the fatwa of another scholar? How do you know what was meant by the fatwa? How do you know when it was said? How do you know what circumstance? How do you... Okay. So when it's someone not qualified, we want a reference. We want a reference. Or we know for sure this person only answers based on a particular madhab, for example, or a particular scholar. I know this person, a student of a Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, for example, he only knows the fatwa of a Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen. Every answer is the fatwa of Ibn Uthaymeen. That's an indicator that the fatwa is not from his own ijtihad, it's from another scholar. Or this person is a mufti in the Hanafi madhab, or in the Hanbali madhab, all his answers are Hanbali. All his answers are Hanafi. That's an indication that it's not from him, it's from a reliable source. But the person who thinks, I'll pick and choose what I think is correct, there's a problem here. That's the one who's not qualified. The one who's qualified, their answer is our proof. The one who's qualified, their answer in and of itself is our proof. As stated by, I mentioned 2 names earlier. Al-Shatibi and Al-Shanqiti. Al-Shatibi in Al-Muwafaqat and Al-Shanqiti in Sharh Maraqi Su'ud. So, if they're qualified, Sheikh Saad comes, for example, to the UK, and I ask for a fatwa, that's it. That's it. That's all that I need. Because I know that Sheikh Saad al-Shatri is qualified. If I go to a masjid and ask another person, we want either a reference, or we want to be quite certain that this person doesn't give his own ijtihad. Yeah? Doesn't just speak from his own self. And has an understanding of fiqh. Or we want a reference, a direct reference. طيب, okay.
When you say reference, you mean a reference for that
From a scholar.
For that person.
No.
From a scholar.
From a scholar, yes. So, for example, if you were to ask me, I'm not a mufti or a qualified mujtahid. So from me, you want to know this is the Hanbali madhab, or you want to know this is the opinion of X, Y, Z scholar, or you etc. Because it won't suffice you my own ijtihad myself. Or at the very least, you want to be confident that I won't give my own ijtihad just like that. As for someone who is qualified, then the answer itself is fine. Whether it's Hanbali fatwa, Shafi'i, or whether it doesn't even stick to the former madhab. Their fatwa in itself suffices. And I'll end with a final point here before we go. It's very important to distinguish between two things, and we'll expand on this next week, inshallah. There are issues that are contemporary issues for today, issues for the UK, issues for me, my circumstances, my environment. These need a fatwa from a person who's with us. It doesn't have to be living in the UK, but he needs to know the circumstance I'm in very well. That's one thing. Then there are issues that are done and dusted. I don't need a new guy to come and tell me how to pray salah. That was spoken about 1400 years ago. So following the scholars of the past on these issues is absolutely fine. And in fact, better. It is better to follow, for example, the four madhahib on issues of salah. Ya akhi, this is the practice for thousands of years. Hundreds of years, rather. Hundreds of years, over 1,000 years, this has been the practice in salah. This is how people have prayed. I don't need somebody to come and tell me now, actually, this is the right way to pray. 1,000 years of prayer. What have people been doing then for 1,000 years? So there's no issue at all. What's the ruling on udhiyah? What's the ruling on doing this? Is this salah valid? Is this salah invalid? These are done and dusted issues. If you're following a madhab on that issue, alhamdulillah, finished. Yeah, absolutely finished. New issues, however, a person needs to ask a mufti, because you're not going to find these issues in the books of fiqh of the past. This requires a mufti, a contemporary mufti. Such as what? What are contemporary issues?
Mortgages.
UK student loans, mortgages.
Wiping on socks.
Sorry?
Socks.
Wiping on these socks. It's a contemporary issue. Stuff relating to aeroplane, like praying on an aeroplane and praying inside the car and so on. Okay, business and transactions are huge when it comes to contemporary issues. All of it is contemporary. Because finance and money has changed so much. They require contemporary fatwa.
Dealing with people in general.
Dealing with people in general. Place and environment. Back then, Muslim khilafah. This is how it's done. Today, not a Muslim khilafah. Non-Muslim khilafah. Yeah? So things are going to be done different. We're not going to have the same rulings as we had then. There's no way we can have the same rulings as we had then. It's impossible. Yeah? We living in the UK, circumstances vary. And the varying of circumstances are for the mufti. That's not a ticket for people to say, sorry, we're living in the UK now. Yeah? Or sorry, it's 2016 now. Yeah? So therefore, no, thank you. Yes, it's 2016. Yes, it's the UK. Therefore, we need a fatwa from a scholar. We don't need your input. Yeah, so because people take advantage of this. You say something, the moment you say something about the religion, it's the 21st century now, mate. Yeah? So, who changed the rulings for the 21st century? If a scholar changed it, no problem. We can go with that, but not you. Yeah, so this is a big thing. Old issues, done and dusted issues, past scholars. Contemporary issues, contemporary fatwa from the scholar. Okay, contemporary fatwa from the scholar. Not us. We can easily fall into this trap. We can easily fall into this trap and get excited about ourselves and think, you know what, Jazakallah khair, this scholar, great guy, but I don't think he's understood the circumstance. Well, you're not always going to understand it better than him. So even if you don't believe he's understood it, his fatwa counts more than yours. Yeah? So that's important. It is true that sometimes people don't go about things the right way. They ask for UK-related issues to someone in. Is that permissible to ask someone in Saudi Arabia for a fatwa in the UK?
Yeah.
It depends if how well they understand the situation.
That's it. It's permissible. But on this condition. Either it's an old issue, done and dusted, doesn't require new ijtihad, then there's no problem. Like salah, like hajj, etc. Or you have explained things to them. Not, what's the ruling on taking an interest loan? As some people said, oh, he's living in Saudi Arabia. Do you think he sat there looking at student loans company's website and checking out the regulations? As far as he's concerned, you said interest loan. So what more is there to say? Is he going to say yes? It's fine? Yeah. As one of this is the final point, we've taken long. As one of the mashayikh when he came, Sheikh Al-Hayyus, so someone asked him and said, what's the ruling on taking an interest loan to buy a house? He said, brother, do you want me to make interest halal? You're asking me about interest loan. You want me to make it halal? Well, you've answered the question yourself. Yeah? But if you say, this is the case, it's like this, it's like this, is this interest? Yeah? Is this, as Sheikh Sa'd al-Khatlan says, and this is, you'll have seen this a lot. People write, brother, if there's interest, it's obviously haram. Yeah? If there's interest, it's haram. And some people answer, this is their answer. If there's interest in it, it's haram. So the Shaykh says, who needed that answer? Who needs someone to tell them if there's interest, it's haram? He's not asking you if there's interest, it's haram. He knows that very well. In fact, if he didn't agree with that, he wouldn't be a Muslim. He's asking you, is interest involved in this issue? In this particular issue, is there interest? Is it haram? In this particular issue, is there? Anyways, we'll talk about that a little bit more next lesson. Next lesson will start on page 26. Inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam, sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. I believe next lesson, Asr will be on, Asr will be at 5, yes. So, is this time